And here we're at the last section, chapters 5 and 6 of Mice and Men. The picture here on the screen is of Lenny with his puppy moments before its tragic end. Okay, so chapter 5, pages 84 to 98. Please make sure you read the chapters first. Let's get right into it. So, scene begins very ominously. Lenny's holding his puppy, the puppy that he got from Slim's dog Lulu, the one that he begged George to get, and George finally let him have a puppy, and he spent all the time just holding it, petting it, and now very sadly it's dead. And Lenny is sitting there holding his puppy and just petting its head the same way how earlier in the novel, in the beginning, he was stroking and petting the dead mouse. And once again, that in itself was also a bit of foreshadowing. He hadn't picked up on it. But at this point, with the puppy dead, there's all that optimism, all that hope that George and Lenny could get their farm one day, and that Lenny would be able to have the rabbits and they could have a happy, comfortable life that was safe from all the cruelty in the world. All that freedom is gone, especially when Curly's wife appears and insists on talking to Lenny. Now, this is, the scene is just filled with, don't do it, just go away, just leave him alone, kind of moments where I know when I was reading it, I was just wishing to all ends that Curly's wife would just leave Lenny alone because, you know, he just wants to be happy. And since Curly's wife is incapable of being happy, she interferes and does things to bring other people down, whether purposefully or not. And she is like Crooks earlier in the story. She recognizes that Lenny doesn't understand a lot of what's told to him. He doesn't get the subtler nuances of a lot of things, so she's able to open up and reveal to him how she had this dream of becoming a movie star, but since she had to get married, she has this desperation in her life, this lacking of something. And what's really interesting is in the final moments before her death, Steinbeck really gives this sense of sympathy for her. We realize that she too had a dream that she couldn't realize, that something got in the way of. And she's very similar to Candy and to Crooks and to Lenny and to George and to every other character and to every human being who also has a dream. So despite her being the downfall of men and the destroyer of friendships, as Steinbeck does present her, we get a bit of sympathy for her here. And her idea of paradise has also not come true. And so, unfortunately for her, even though she recognizes the gentleness in Lenny and that he can be, you could tell him anything, she doesn't recognize the dangers in Lenny with his unconscious strength that he has. Lenny is extraordinarily strong, and he doesn't understand how strong he is. He doesn't have the same concept for his physical strength that George does, for example. And when she dies, during the course of the struggle, Lenny breaks her neck, because once again, like with Curly, when there is violence or struggle, Lenny's reaction is to clamp down and to just make it stop. So very much the same way the puppy died. The puppy was squirming and wiggling and wanting to get away. We can infer that, just like how Curly's wife is squirming and struggling and trying to get away. Lenny clamps down and inadvertently, accidentally, breaks the neck of both creatures. And in her death, Steinbeck grants her a bit of virtue. He calls her pretty and simple, sweet and young. It's a quote from the book. And that all the unhappiness from her life has disappeared, leaving her looking just sweet and young. And this is interesting, though, because the entire book, Steinbeck has spent it maligning women, saying that they are troublesome and only just seductive in their nature. So it's kind of disturbing, actually, that Steinbeck seems to kind of subtly imply that the only way for a woman to overcome the nature of her seductiveness and destroying men's relationships, the only way to do that is to die. So, interesting there, old Steinbeck. Well, the end of the chapter switches to George, and he comes in and sees that what Lenny has done, and right away, this painful mission of what he has to do becomes clear to him. We come back to that earlier scene with Candy's dog, and he has a choice. He can either watch his best friend, his more than a friend, get murdered horribly by Curly's lynch mob. And in case you don't know what a lynch mob is, uh, lynch is another word for hanging. Mob is a group of people. Usually, when you say the word mob, you mean a group of people who have a single purpose in mind, who you cannot reason with. It's impossible, students, to reason with a mob. You can't. You can reason with an individual, but with a group of people, it's very impossible to reason with them. And a lynch mob being, their one goal is to go kill Lenny. So George recognizes right away he can either kill Lenny himself or watch Lenny go through a brutal, horrible, torturous death. And we know what Kant has to say about the nature of torture and the justice meeting the end, or the justice being equal to that of the deed. So that's something to look at. What is Lenny guilty of? What did he do? What is the justice as an end result? Something to consider, whether defense or prosecution. Now, George's realization that what he has to do, his choice is very clear. Learning from what Candy went through, he decides he has to kill Lenny himself. George can't let a stranger kill his best friend. Can't let them torture him and execute him. But when he has this realization, his response to it is almost one of the most insightful and realistic responses, because when he realizes what he has to do, the dream dissolves. The dream of the farm that he and Lenny have dissolves. And Candy, when he realizes what's going on, Candy is there. He desperately clings to the dream in an unrealistic way, desperately hoping that he could still have the farm with George. George and him could still do it, but George is very realistic, and he's like, no, there's no room for dreaming in such a difficult and inhospitable world. Inhospitable being a wonderful word to mean basically unfriendly, unwelcoming, unnurturing world. So then we move on to chapter 6, pages 99 to 107, last few pages in the chapter. And we once again start off with a repeating of the very first part of the book, which is a description of the land, of the nature of the pond. And that's actually where Lenny goes, is down to the pond to wait for George. Now, this time, though, the natural beauty is marred, is torn up by the suffering of innocence. First starting off with that innocent snake being snatched up and eaten by the heron, and then by the innocent Lenny. And by innocent, I don't mean not guilty. I mean innocent as in the way he views the world, the way his ability to see things is very innocent. Lenny is eventually killed here. And this final scene between George and Lenny, which Mr. Taylor has provided for all of you actually in one of his video lessons, you'll get to watch that scene from the most recent movie version of the book. It's very sad, but it's almost kind of beautiful in a way, or sweet, in that Lenny is able to retain his blissful ignorance. He never really sees the end coming. He doesn't suffer at all up until the very end. But at the end, when it's all done and the mob arrives chasing down Lenny, led by Curly and Carlson and the other men who only see Lenny as a danger and as a threat, there's only Slim, the one who from the very beginning was set as a character of self-assurance and quiet competence, someone who could say very little but get a lot across, and was a natural leader to be respected, not feared, the way that Curly is a feared leader. Slim is a respected leader. People want to follow him because they respect him. He's the only one who understands how George's loss, it's so profound, and he gets that George needs to be consoled, because the rest of them are like, oh, good job, hey, you killed him, you got him, good for you, and they're slapping him on the back and congratulating him. but only Slim is like, oh, I know what happened here, and that George has lost something more valuable to him than can be described. So he's able to console George a little bit there. And Carlson and Curly, when they watch Slim lead George away from the riverbank, they're just like completely stunned that George would be at all sad here. I mean, they feel like he's done a good thing in killing Lenny, that he's done something that has served an end. And it's not that they're heartless necessarily, but that they're ignorant of the friendship. They never understood the power of their friendship between George and Lenny. So Slim understood it. But since Curly and Carlson couldn't understand that friendship because they are so isolated and so unable to see the power of such a friendship, they couldn't get why George would be upset right now, why he'd be sad. So Lenny was the only thing that distinguished him in his life from the lives of other men, was the only thing for George that gave him a special sense of purpose. For George, Lenny was what distinguished him. His friendship with Lenny, his taking care of Lenny, and the two of them living life together was all that he really had. It made him different from other men. Now he's just another ranch worker with nothing but himself to look out for. And he's now like every other ranch worker in that he's isolated and alone, despite being surrounded by guys every night in a bunkhouse. And this really kind of grim note, this sad note in which the novel closes, really tells us that dreams don't really have a place in a world filled with such injustice and adversity, which is Steinbeck saying that this time period, the Depression era America, is not a time for people to be able to dream. And so he's commenting on also the society and the government that got us to the Depression is wrong because it kills the ability for people to dream and see their dreams be lived up. And so there's a bit of commentary on the idea of the American dream here. This idea that we all have something that we want. And in fact, most of the characters have some kind of dream or wish, and circumstances of the life in this time period have robbed them of these dreams. And that they all have very similar desire to have a freedom to follow their dreams. They all want it. Curly's wife wanted the freedom to be an actress. Candy wants the freedom to not worry about where to go. He wants to be able to work and be useful, but with one hand he can't be useful where he is. Crooks wants to belong. He wants to, also join the farm that George and Lenny dream about, to be able to live the life themselves, that no one can tell them what to do, that they can be independent and self-assured and have protection from an inhospitable world. This is typically American, that we still see even today. So some big things to really remember about the idea of how powerful this friendship is, and what gets in the way of any kind of dream or friendship or comfort in the cruelty of the world. So I want to remind you all that there are study questions to answer for chapters 5 and 6 on Echo, and you want to make sure to get those typed up and answered. Make sure to do the minimum required words for all of those. And as you read these chapters, or as you have you listened to the lecture, go back and make sure you're looking for evidence for either your witness statement or for whether you're prosecuting or defending Lenny and or George. Make sure that you are annotating as much as possible for all that information. And I do believe that's all I needed to say to you. I want to remind all of you that you can, of course, if you have questions or things you want to discuss further, that can occur during class tomorrow. Tomorrow being, well, whatever day that might be that you have a question. Right.